Hello, dear listeners. Today you will hear a story about how a forgotten rifle, a past he tried to bury, and a desperate plea for his daughter's life collide in a kill he never made. By the way, write in the comments which city you are from. We're very curious to know. Now sit back and enjoy the story. The weight of a rifle, not fired in years, felt foreign in his hands, yet terrifyingly familiar. Caleb ran a callous thumb over the cold steel of the scope, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of sunlight cutting through the cabin's gloom. It had been a lifetime since he'd felt this particular heft, this balance, this silent promise of precision. He lived alone now, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the Pacific Northwest, the nearest neighbor a good 10 miles as the crow flies, further by the winding dirt track. His days were a monotonous rhythm of chopping wood, mending fences, and tending a small, stubborn garden. A self-imposed exile, a penance for a sin he hadn't committed, but one that had nonetheless broken him. Every shadow held a memory, every silence a ghost of the shot he never took. He woke before dawn, the silence of the mountains a constant companion, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk or the rustle of wind through the ancient pines. Each morning began with coffee, black and bitter, consumed while staring out at the mist-shrouded peaks, his mind often drifting, replaying fragments of a life he'd tried to erase. The cabin itself was a testament to his retreat, sparse, functional, devoid of anything that might remind him too keenly of the world he'd left behind. No photographs, no medals, just the essentials. Yet, the rifle, a relic of his former life, remained. Not loaded, not even assembled, but always within reach, a morbid comfort. He'd clean it sometimes, the meticulous process, a ritual, a muscle memory that refused to fade. The smell of gun oil, the faint metallic tang, would transport him back to the range, to the arid heat of the Middle East, to the sterile precision of a sniper's nest. He remembered Sergeant Miller's voice, raspy from years of shouting during boot camp. This isn't about killing recruits. It's about control, about knowing the wind, the distance, your own heartbeat. It's about making a decision and living with it. Caleb had learned control all right. Too much, perhaps. He'd learned to hold his breath, to slow his pulse, that's to become one with the rifle, a silent extension of its deadly purpose. But what about living with the decision not to make the shot? That was the lesson Miller hadn't covered. The target, a high-value asset, a known terrorist financier, had been in his crosshairs. Clear shot, perfect conditions. But a child, no older than 7, had wandered into the kill zone, chasing a stray dog. Caleb had hesitated, a fraction of a second. Enough for the target to move, to disappear into the crowd. Enough for his commanding officer to scream into his comms. Enough for the mission to be compromised. Enough for Caleb to be branded a liability. A man who couldn't pull the trigger when it mattered most. The official report called it operational failure due to unforeseen circumstances. Unofficially, he was a coward, discharged, stripped of his pension, sent home with a dishonorable stain on his record and a ghost in his head. He'd faced down insurgents, but the phantom echo of that child's laughter, the one he'd saved, was a different kind of enemy, one that haunted his waking hours and stalked his dreams. He'd tried to bury it all, the skills, the memories, the man he once was. He'd built this life of quiet desperation, a fortress against the past. Sometimes he'd walk the perimeter of his property, the tall pines a silent guard, his eyes scanning the tree line, a habit ingrained too deeply to ever truly break. He'd check the locks twice, listen to the night sounds, his senses always on edge, even when there was nothing to fear but his own thoughts. He was a ghost, haunting his own life. A mundane interaction, a rare trip to the nearest general store for supplies, would highlight his detachment. The store clerk, a kindly woman named Martha, would offer a small smile, a polite, "How's the weather up your way, Caleb?" And he'd offer a grunt in return, his gaze already drifting to the door, a phantom threat always lurking just beyond his periphery. He remembered a time, long before, when he'd laugh, share a joke. Now the words felt foreign, his throat tight. He was good at silence, at observation, at blending into the background. These were the skills that had made him an exceptional sniper. And now they made him an exceptional recluse. He'd meticulously maintained his small generator, his water pump, his satellite phone. not for connection, but for self-sufficiency. A contingency plan for a life he hoped would never be interrupted. He knew the local terrain like the back of his hand, every game trail, every hidden spring, every vantage point. It was a secondary nature, a survival instinct honed by years of training, a silent promise he'd made to himself that he would never be caught unawares again. Not like that day. Not with a child in the crosshairs. The memory still burned, a raw wound beneath the scar tissue of time. He'd replayed it 1,000 times, each scenario ending the same. The child, the hesitation, the target's escape. What if he had taken the shot? Would the child have survived? Would he have been a hero or a monster? The questions were a torment, an endless loop in the quiet of his cabin. He'd sworn off the life, the violence, the impossible choices. He'd told himself he was done, that his war was over. He'd even tried to mend bridges with his daughter, Sarah, but the chasm between them, carved out by his years of deployment and then his sudden, inexplicable withdrawal, was too wide. He remembered her bright, questioning eyes as a child, the way her small hand had fit perfectly in his. He'd missed her first steps, her school plays, the awkwardness of her teenage years, all for a war that had left him broken. After his discharge, he'd tried to be a father again. But the man who came home was not the man who left. His silence, his haunted gaze, his inability to connect, it had all driven her away. He'd alienated her, pushed her away, convinced himself it was for her own good, that she was safer without him. He was a broken man, and a broken man had no place in a young woman's life. He'd clung to that belief, clutching it like a shield against the pain of her absence. But deep down, a flicker of the old fire remained. A dormant predator waiting for a trigger. His hands, though calloused from manual labor, still held a surgeon's steadiness, a sniper's touch. He'd catch himself sometimes, his eyes tracking a bird in flight, mentally calculating its trajectory, the wind speed, the lead time. Old habits died hard, or perhaps they never truly died, merely slept, waiting for the right kind of nightmare to wake them. He was cleaning the rifle again, the familiar way to comfort, when the satellite phone, a device he rarely used, buzzed on the rough-hewn table. He stared at it, a dark premonition coiling in his gut. It was an unfamiliar number, untraceable. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the answer button, a sudden, inexplicable dread washing over him. He picked it up. The voice on the other end was cold, synthesized, devoid of emotion. It spoke a name he hadn't heard in years, a name that sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Caleb Thorne. Then a single chilling sentence, delivered with an almost casual brutality. "We have your daughter." The line went dead. The phantom kick of the rifle. The breath held. The world narrowed to a single point. But this time, the stakes were personal. The rifle, once a symbol of his past failure, now felt like a lead weight in his hands, a grim prophecy. The quiet solitude of his self-imposed exile was about to be shattered, not by a memory, but by a present terror that would demand the very skills he had tried so desperately to bury. The ghost of a bullet, the one he never fired, was about to find its mark, whether he liked it or not. The silence of the cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. Caleb had just finished cleaning the last of the breakfast dishes, the mundane ritual, a flimsy shield against the thoughts that always tried to creep in. Then his phone buzzed, a harsh, unwelcome sound in the quiet. It was an unknown number, a video message. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, to maintain the carefully constructed peace of his isolation. But something, a flicker of unease, a cold premonition he couldn't shake, made him tap it open. The image that flickered to life on the small screen was grainy, dark, but unmistakable. It was his daughter Maya, bound, gagged, her eyes wide with terror, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. A cold dread, unlike any he'd ever known, seized him, twisting his gut into a hard, unforgiving knot. The cartel's message was a cold whisper across oceans. "Your daughter for a life, the one you saved." The image froze, Maya's terrified face staring back at him, accusing. The message, delivered in a heavily accented, chillingly calm voice, replayed in his mind, each word a hammer blow. "We have your daughter, Caleb, Maya, a beautiful girl. She is safe for now, but her safety depends on you. We want the senator, The one you protected all those years ago. The one you let live. You have 24 hours to make him disappear. Permanently. If you fail, she dies. And we will send you proof, piece by piece. The phone slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the rough wooden table. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the cabin, a silence that now felt like the world holding its breath. His breath hitched, a raw, guttural sound tearing from his throat. A sound he hadn't made since that day on the rooftop. This wasn't a ghost from his past. This was a living, breathing nightmare. This was Maya, his daughter, the one person he had failed to protect, even from himself, by pushing her away, by letting his own demons build a wall between them. The initial shock gave way to a surge of primal rage, a fire he hadn't felt in years, not since his last tour, not since he'd traded the battlefield for this self-imposed exile. He slammed his fist onto the table, the old wood groaning in protest, the impact jarring his bones. Maya. He saw her face, not just the terror etched there now, but her bright smile, her defiant chin, the way she always crinkled her nose when she laughed, a habit she'd inherited from her mother. Memories, sharp and painful, flooded his mind, each one a fresh wound. Her first steps, scraped knees from climbing trees, the awkward father-daughter dance at her middle school where he'd stepped on her toes, but she'd just laughed. He'd missed so much, pushed her away when the guilt of his past became too heavy to bear, convinced she was better off without him, a broken man. Now, that distance, that chasm he'd created, was a weapon in their hands, used against the very person he had sought to protect by his absence. The irony was a bitter taste. He stood, his movements jerky at first, then gaining a terrifying precision, a familiar, almost forgotten rhythm taking over. The familiar adrenaline, once a companion on countless missions, now coursed through him, sharper, colder, fueled by a terror far more potent than any battlefield fear. This wasn't about mission parameters or strategic objectives. This was about blood. His eyes scanned the room, not for comfort, but for tools, for anything that could be bent to his will. His old combat knife, tucked away in a locked box beneath the floorboards, its blade still keen, the worn leather of his old tactical vest, smelling faintly of dust and sweat. The satellite phone he kept for emergencies, rarely used, a relic of a life he'd tried to shed. His hands, though aged and calloused, remembered the motions, the economy of movement, the silent efficiency. He pulled out a worn map of Central America, the region where he'd last heard Maya was studying abroad. A semester in Costa Rica, a dream she'd chased with the same stubbornness he possessed. He knew the cartels operated there, a shadow government, but he'd dismissed the specific danger to her, foolishly believing his own isolation and her relative anonymity would protect her. He traced lines, mentally calculating distances, identifying potential safe houses, escape routes, choke points. He needed intel, and he needed it fast before the 24 hours became an impossible deadline. He remembered the last time he'd seen her, a strained coffee shop meeting in the city. She'd tried to bridge the chasm between them, her eyes pleading for a connection he was too afraid to offer. He, still trapped in his own prison of regret and self-loathing, had pushed her further away, his words clipped, his gaze distant. A bitter taste filled his mouth, a cocktail of regret and self-recrimination. He had to make this right. He had to bring her home. He started with the satellite phone, punching in a series of encrypted numbers, each one a ghost from his past. Most were dead ends, numbers disconnected, voices changed, or simply fear in their tone. He understood it. He'd asked for help from men who had long since buried their own pasts. The frustration was a physical ache, tightening his chest. He slammed the phone down, the metallic clang echoing his growing desperation. He needed a lead, a thread to pull. He thought of his old training, the relentless drills, the instructor's barking orders. Adapt, improvise, overcome. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe, to think like the hunter he once was. He spent the next few hours in a blur of frantic activity, his mind a whirlwind of tactical scenarios and desperate prayers. He called every contact he still had, ghosts of his former life, trading favors he hadn't known he still possessed, pushing past the initial refusals. Most were dead ends, or too scared to help, their own lives too fragile to risk. But one, an old intelligence asset he'd saved from a sticky situation years ago, a man named Ramirez finally came through. His voice, when it crackled through the secure line, was trembling, laced with fear. "Los Zetas," Ramirez whispered, the name a curse. "They've got her. They want Senator Davies dead. They think you're the only one who can do it, Caleb. You saved him once, you can unsave him now." The confirmation solidified the impossible choice, a cruel twist of fate. Senator Davies, the man whose life he'd spared on that rooftop in Kandahar, the man who had ordered the mission that broke him, was now the key to Maya's survival. Caleb felt the phantom kick of a rifle against his shoulder, the breath held, the world narrowing to a single point. But this time, the stakes were personal, far more personal than any flag or ideology. He pulled out the dusty, disassembled sniper rifle from its hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. The weight of it, not fired in years, felt foreign in his hands, yet terrifyingly familiar, an extension of his own will. Each piece clicked into place with practiced ease, the cold steel a comfort, a muscle memory that transcended the years of disuse, of deliberate forgetting. This wasn't about duty or country anymore. This was about a father, stripped bare of everything but his love for his child, and the cold, hard tools he knew how to wield. He packed a small bag, a few MREs, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, a compass, and enough ammunition to make a statement, to carve a path through whatever stood between him and Maya. His old uniform, long since discarded, was replaced by dark, nondescript clothing, practical, silent, designed for blending into shadows. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror, a haunted reflection staring back. The man who had sought peace in isolation was gone, replaced by the ghost of a warrior, resurrected by a father's love, by a primal, unyielding need. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, unyielding determination, a single-minded focus that burned away all doubt. He would move, silent and unseen, a predator once more, hunting not for a target, but for his daughter. He would find Maya. He would make them pay. He would do whatever it took, no matter the cost, no matter the blood on his hands. The ghost of his past, the target he never killed, now stood as the ultimate price for his daughter's life, pulling him into a world he swore he'd left behind, with stakes far higher than any battlefield. The sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows across the cabin, painting the world in hues of blood and ash. Caleb stepped out, leaving the quiet solitude behind, a ghost walking back into the world, his purpose etched into every hardened line of his face. The next chapter of his life, one he never wanted to write, had just begun. A brutal symphony of vengeance and desperate hope. The corruptor's web awaited him, a tangle of lies and impossible choices. But for Maya, he would walk through hell, and he would drag hell back with him if he had to. The agency's offer wasn't a lifeline. It was another noose, expertly tied. Caleb had seen enough of those in his life, both literal and metaphorical. This one, however, felt different. It was silk-lined, promising salvation. But the knot was still there, tightening with every word from Agent Thorne. Thorne, a man whose suits looked too expensive for government work and whose smile never quite reached his eyes, had found Caleb in his isolated sanctuary with disconcerting ease. He spoke of national security, leveraging unique assets, and a humanitarian crisis. All the buzzwords designed to hook a man like Caleb, a man who once believed in those ideals. But Thorne's real hook was simpler, colder. "We know about your daughter, Mr. Thorne. We can help, or we can watch." The offer was clear. Help them assassinate Senator Davies, the very man Caleb had sworn to protect on his last, failed mission. And they would ensure his daughter's safe return. Refuse, and he was on his own, facing a cartel that knew no mercy. Caleb had agreed because he had no choice. His first task was to gather intelligence on Davies' current security detail and routine. He moved through the city, a ghost in the urban sprawl, his senses reawakened. Every shadow held a potential threat, every casual glance a possible tale. He found himself falling back into the old rhythms, the almost meditative state of observation. He remembered his first days in sniper school, the instructors drilling them on pattern recognition and predictive analysis. Sergeant Miller, a man with eyes like chipped flint, had once barked, A good sniper doesn't just shoot, he sees. He sees the ghost in the machine, the flaw in the system. Caleb saw the flaws now, the subtle tells of Davies' movements, the predictable rotations of his security. But the agency's involvement was a constant, nagging itch. Thorne's updates were always vague, always pushing him towards the kill, never offering concrete details about his daughter. The cartel, meanwhile, sent a chilling video. A brief, grainy shot of Maya, blindfolded, a silent plea in her eyes. It was enough. It was more than enough. He used his old contacts, men he hadn't spoken to in years, to verify the video's authenticity and to try and get a read on the cartel's current operations. The information came back fragmented, but consistent. The cartel was powerful, ruthless, and had deep roots in the region where Davies was currently making a diplomatic tour. He also started noticing discrepancies in the agency's intel. The security schematics Thorne provided for Davies' current location, a heavily fortified embassy, were subtly different from what Caleb observed on the ground. Small details, easily dismissed by an untrained eye, but glaring to someone who had lived and breathed such environments. A camera angle slightly off, a patrol route that didn't quite match the blueprint. It raised a red flag. He remembered a mission in Kandahar years ago, where a local informant had given them faulty intel. They'd walked into an ambush. He'd learned then that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially when lives were on the line. He started to double-check everything, using his own methods, relying on his own eyes and his gut. He realized the agency wasn't just leveraging him. They were manipulating him, guiding him towards a specific outcome that might have little to do with his daughter's safety. Thorne's voice, smooth and deceptively calm, was a constant reminder of the leash he was on. "We need this done quickly, Caleb. Time is not on your side. Or hers." The words were meant to be motivating, but they only fueled his suspicion. He began to suspect that Davies wasn't just a target. He was a pawn in a larger game, and Caleb was the unwitting executioner. The more he dug, the more the web of deceit tightened around him. He found evidence that the cartel had been allowed to operate with unusual impunity in certain areas that coincidentally aligned with Davies' political interests. It wasn't just a random kidnapping for leverage. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, and both the cartel and the agency seemed to be playing different sides of the same dirty coin. He started to think about the unmade kill, the one that had broken him. He'd been ordered to take out a high-value target, a warlord, but at the last moment, he'd seen a child in the crosshairs. He'd hesitated, and the warlord had escaped, leading to more bloodshed. He'd been disgraced, but he'd saved a child. Now, he was being asked to kill a man, potentially innocent in the larger scheme, to save his own child. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was being forced to choose between two evils, and the agency was ensuring he had no third option. He started planning not just for the assassination, but for the extraction of his daughter, and for a way to expose the entire twisted operation. He knew the risks. He knew they would come for him if he deviated from their plan. But the image of Maya's face, scared and vulnerable, was a constant burning fire in his gut. He would burn them all down if he had to. He remembered a lesson from boot camp, delivered by a grizzled old gunnery sergeant during a field exercise. Always have an alternate plan, gentlemen, because the moment you think you have control, that's the moment the enemy takes it from you. Caleb was taking back control. He was no longer just a pawn. He was a weapon, aimed at targets far beyond what Thorne intended. The final briefing from Thorne was perfunctory, almost dismissive. He handed Caleb a burner phone, pre-programmed with a single number. "When it's done, call this. Your daughter will be released." He didn't offer details, just a cold, transactional exchange. Caleb nodded, his face unreadable. He had his own plan now, a dangerous, desperate gamble. He had located Maya thanks to a desperate last-ditch effort through an old intelligence contact, and he knew the agency wasn't just manipulating him, they were planning to eliminate him after the hit. Davies was scheduled to address a high-profile summit in a secure location. A perfect, clean kill shot. But Caleb wasn't interested in a clean kill for them. He was interested in a clean escape for his daughter. He had to make it look like he was going for the shot, draw out the agency's own surveillance teams, and then pivot. It was a high-wire act, with his daughter's life hanging in the balance. He moved into position, the familiar weight of a suppressed rifle in his hands. The world narrowed to the scope. The breath held, the heartbeat a dull thrum against his ribs. He saw Davies, oblivious, stepping onto the podium. He saw the agency's Overwatch teams, positioned to ensure he completed the mission and to ensure he didn't survive it. He also saw a window of opportunity, a brief, chaotic moment he could exploit. He didn't take the shot. Instead, he created a diversion, a controlled explosion in a nearby empty building, enough to trigger a lockdown and chaos, but not enough to cause casualties. The agency teams scrambled, their focus shifting from him to the perceived threat. In the confusion, Caleb slipped away, using the chaos he'd engineered to initiate his own extraction plan for Maya. He knew he was burning every bridge, making himself an enemy of both the cartel and the agency. But as he moved, a grim satisfaction settled over him. He hadn't killed an innocent man, and he was coming for his daughter. With every step deeper into the shadows, the lines between right and wrong blurred, and he realized the hardest kill would not be the one he was ordered to make, but the one he had to choose to avoid. A choice that had now set him on a collision course with everyone who sought to control him. The target, a man he once swore to protect, now stood as the ultimate test of his broken oath. Caleb moved through the crowded streets of the capital, a ghost in plain sight. Every shadow was a potential threat. Every face a possible cartel operative or agency tale. The city's hum was a cacophony of distractions, each one a potential vulnerability. He'd spent days studying Senator Davies' routine, a man who, ironically, had been a secondary protection asset on a diplomatic mission years ago, a mission Caleb had been part of. Davies was a creature of habit, a vulnerability Caleb now exploited. The agency through Thorne had provided a clean rifle, a ghost weapon with no traceable history, and a dossier on Davies' security detail. A detail Caleb knew was compromised, or at least easily circumvented by someone with his particular skill set. He felt the phantom kick of the rifle, the breath held, the world narrowed to a single point. But this time, the stakes were personal. He remembered the cold precision of his training, the hours spent on breathing control, trigger discipline, windage, and elevation. It wasn't just about hitting the target. It was about understanding the environment, the variables, the human element. His chosen perch was an abandoned construction site overlooking the embassy district, a perfect vantage point for Davies' weekly address. The wind was negligible, the distance manageable. He assembled the rifle with practiced ease, each component clicking into place with a familiar, reassuring weight. This wasn't about vengeance or duty. It was about Maya. He replayed her voice in his head, a desperate, muffled plea from the cartel's last call. That sound was a constant, searing reminder of why he was here. He scanned the crowd, looking for anything out of place, any sign of the cartel's presence, any agency surveillance he hadn't accounted for. The agency's offer wasn't a lifeline. It was another noose, expertly tied, designed to make him complicit, to ensure he couldn't walk away clean. He knew Thorne would be watching, waiting for the signal, for the shot that would seal Davies' fate and, in Thorne's twisted logic, secure national interests. But what about Maya? What about the oath he took to protect, not to destroy? He thought of his drill sergeant, a grizzled old lifer named Master Sergeant Miller, who'd hammered into them the concept of ethical kill chains. "You pull that trigger, son," Miller would bark. "You own that death. Every single consequence. Make damn sure it's the right one." The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was about to own a death for a different reason entirely. He saw Davies emerge, flanked by security, stepping onto the podium. The senator, oblivious, began his speech, his voice amplified across the plaza. Caleb centered the crosshairs. Davies, the man he once swore to protect, now a pawn in a game far larger than himself, a target. The image of Maya, laughing in a park, flashed behind his eyes. He remembered taking her there once, teaching her how to skip stones across a pond. Simple, innocent moments. Moments he desperately wanted back. He adjusted his breathing, the world narrowing. He could feel the pulse in his temple, slow and steady. This was it. The moment of truth. The choice. His finger tightened on the trigger. The senator's face was clear in the scope, a confident, oblivious mask. Caleb could see the slight tremor in Davies' left hand, a nervous habit he remembered from their time together. It was a human detail, a small, insignificant thing that suddenly felt monumental. He remembered the agency's contingency plan, Thorne's smug assurance that they had other assets in place if Caleb failed. He knew what that meant: a cleanup, a scapegoat, and Maya still in danger. But what if he didn't pull the trigger? What if he found another way? The thought was a sudden, violent jolt. He shifted his aim, not away from Davies, but slightly, a fraction of an inch to the right. A shot designed not to kill, but to create chaos, to draw attention, to force a different outcome. It was a gamble, a desperate suicidal play. But it was his play. He squeezed the trigger, the rifle cracked, a sharp, loud report that echoed through the plaza. Not a headshot, not a heart shot. The bullet struck the microphone stand just inches from Davies' head, sending a shower of sparks and shrapnel, a deafening shriek of feedback through the loudspeakers. Panic erupted. Security swarmed Davies, dragging him from the podium. Caleb didn't wait. He dismantled the rifle in seconds, stuffing the pieces into his pack. He was already moving, flowing through the chaos, a predator in reverse, disappearing into the panicked crowd. He knew Thorne would be furious. He knew the cartel would be enraged. But he had bought himself time, and he had not killed. The decision was made. The consequences, however, were just beginning. He moved through the city, his escape route a labyrinth of back alleys and service tunnels, the sounds of sirens growing closer. His phone vibrated. A text message, an unknown number, a single word, Maya, followed by coordinates, a drop-off point. The cartel was still playing, but now on his terms, or at least on terms he could manipulate. He had defied both the agency and the cartel, creating a third path. It wasn't about country or child anymore, not in the simple binary way they wanted. It was about principle, about not becoming the monster they wanted him to be. He reached the designated location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. He found Maya, bound and gagged, but alive. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his. Relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. He cut her free, holding her close, the shaking in his hands not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of tension. He had saved her, but the fight wasn't over. The agency would be hunting him, and the cartel would want retribution for their botched assassination attempt. He had made his choice, and it had opened a new, dangerous chapter. He knew the cost of that decision would be lifelong vigilance, a constant looking over his shoulder. But looking into Maya's tear-streaked face, seeing her safe, he knew it was a price he would pay 1,000 times over. He had not betrayed his country. He had upheld a deeper oath, an unspoken one that transcended flags and orders. He had chosen humanity, and in doing so, had found a fragile peace. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with unseen enemies and the ghosts of his past that would surely follow. But as he led Maya away, hand in hand, into the fading light of the city, he carried not the weight of a kill he never made, but the quiet strength of a choice he had, at last, made for himself, for his daughter, and for the man he still hoped to be. The echo of that choice would forever define him, a testament to the fact that some battles are fought not with bullets, but with the fragments of a broken heart and an unbreakable will to protect what truly matters. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. See you soon.